Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon again. Thank you for joining the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa for one of our family caregiver webinars. Today's is called Note to Self. It's okay to set boundaries. Just a few housekeeping items. Please keep yourselves on mute for the duration of this webinar, as it is being recorded and it will be added to our YouTube channel, hopefully sometime next week. If you accidentally pop off of mute, I have the capability of putting you back on, so that's no problem. If you have any questions or comments, please utilize the chat box. I will drop a link to a brief evaluation for you to fill out after today's webinar. Thank you in advance for taking the time to complete this, as we really do use this data and we appreciate it very much. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can do that right now. Pop it in there for you in this chat box. Okay, there we go. All right, so my name is Courtney Sand, and I am a licensed and board certified behavior analyst and a neuro resource facilitator with the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa. I have been working in the field of brain injury for the last 7 years or so. I've been with the Brain Injury Alliance 3 years next month, actually, and I've been working in the field of mental health and disability for the last 20 years. I have a deep passion for caregivers. When I was asked to do a family caregiver webinar today, I thought a lot about different topics related to caregiving because, you know, there's just so many, and then caregiving specifically after brain injury. I quickly landed on boundary setting, as it's something that is hard for everybody, every human, especially caregivers. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, this is our disclosures page. The development of this presentation was supported by contract. It's supported by a contract through the Iowa Department of Public Health Brain Injury Services Program. All right, so a summary. What are we going to talk about today? So setting healthy, consistent, clear boundaries with and for yourself, as well as the people in your life, can be a very, very difficult thing to do. As a caregiver, setting boundaries is that much harder. Boundaries are for honoring yourself. They are not for other people. Boundaries are for your safety, your inner peace, your sanity, your health, your happiness. As a caregiver, you have the right to balance your own needs with the needs of the person that you care for. You deserve and are allowed to make a big deal out of the things that feel big to you. If they're important to you, then they're important. And this is easier said than done though, right? So today we're going to talk about what boundaries are, and then as well as specifically how to set and maintain them with yourselves and with other people. So my hope is that you'll feel validated in how difficult it can be to set boundaries, and also give you some real concrete tools that you can use in setting them with yourself and others. The objectives. So as a result of attending this webinar today, my hope is that you'll gain an understanding of why boundaries are important, signs of unhealthy versus unhealthy boundaries, how to create a caregiver bill of rights, how to create a not to-do list, and then how to set and protect your boundaries with others. More specifically, how you can communicate your needs and your expectations to others in a calm, confident way. All right, I really like this quote from Brené Brown. She's a famous speaker and author. She speaks a lot about boundaries. Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. So what is a boundary and why do we need them? Boundaries are necessary. Boundaries, and some of these things might be despite what you have been told or shown in your life. Boundaries don't have to be earned. Having the permission, the right, the worth to set one is not contingent on anything. You don't have to do anything to earn the right to set a boundary. They don't have to be understood or liked. by others. Other people don't have to understand the boundaries that you set for yourself because they're not for other people, they're for you. They're not something that you have to apologize for. They're not easy to set. That's the whole reason we're talking about them today. They're not easy for me to set either. They're not easy for anybody, especially caregivers. They're not conflict free. If you've ever set a boundary or bumped up against someone else's, you'll know that setting boundaries does not come without conflict. They're a form of self-care and self-respect. Others may tell you differently, that you are actually being the opposite and you're being selfish. It's not true. Boundaries protect your peace. They're for honoring yourself and your needs. They're not about telling others what they can and cannot do. Rather, thinking about it more, they're about telling others what you will and won't accept for yourself. It's a real empowering way of communicating, this is what I need, and this is what I don't need. And they're not something you're born just knowing how to do. So again, when we just started this PowerPoint, I said, one of my hopes is that you'll feel validated in how hard this is for people to do. And it's not something you're just born with the skills to set boundaries. It takes a lot of practice. Here's another quote that I like. Walls keep everybody out. Boundaries teach people where the door is. Your boundaries need not be an angry electric fence that shocks those who touch it. Rather, it can be a consistent light around you, and I love this. It can be a consistent light around you that announces, I will be treated sacredly. Boundaries really are about self-love and self-care. Why are setting boundaries so hard? As children in toxic households, toxic relationships, toxic friendships, in toxic jobs, we're taught that speaking up for ourselves and setting boundaries was and is disrespectful. It's selfish, it's disrespectful. And in these situations, you don't actually learn respect, rather you fear what will come if you do speak up for yourself. Agreeing to do things or not do things to keep the peace is a trauma response. And whether your trauma comes from your childhood and or a relationship you've been in, a job, the trauma of going through a brain injury with a loved one, trauma leaves you unable to trust yourself, including your wants and your needs. Low self-esteem also can make you feel as though you aren't worthy or deserving of setting boundaries. Saying things to yourself like, I'm undeserving, my expectations are too high, I deserve this, it's not a big deal. Setting boundaries is also hard because, if you're conflict avoidant, if you don't want to have conflict with other people, setting boundaries will be really tough. Because, and you also don't want to have feelings of guilt. Setting boundaries can make people feel really guilty for asking, sort of demanding, here's what I need and here's what I don't need. You might disappoint other people in setting boundaries. And then a topic that's near and dear to my heart, both personally and professionally, that I speak a lot on is ambiguous loss. And this is a grief that is specific to brain injury, among other things. And it makes setting boundaries that much more difficult. And we'll talk about that in the next few slides. So ambiguous loss, if you've not heard of it before, it's referred to as having but not having. So from the perspective of a caregiver, for example, your loved one has sustained a brain injury. They're physically in front of you, yet not. They're there, they're present, but they're changed. They are cognitively, emotionally different, but physically still present. They're not who they were in the before the brain injury, and neither are you. You grieve who they were in the before. You're living in the aftermath of brain injury. And there is a deep, prolonged, it's a non-ending kind of grief that is associated with this sort of loss. And it feels very much like a death because you've lost this version of who this person was, including yourself. And part of that, from the perspective of a caregiver, is a loss of identity. You often, after a brain injury, if you are a caregiver, you don't know who you are anymore. It can be very, very difficult to not only identify what it is that you want and need, but to also ask for it. Many caregivers, for example, it could be a wife whose husband, his memory is so impacted that he sometimes forgets that he's married and has a family. So if my husband doesn't even recognize who I am in the role of a wife, who am I anymore? I don't recognize myself. I had a full-time job as a professional. Now I had to quit my job and I'm home now 24/7 as a caregiver. I don't recognize who I am. I'm not who I used to be. I miss that person. Who am I now? And then on top of that, not knowing who you are, it's going to be really hard to navigate what it is that I want and need. Setting boundaries is also hard with respect to ambiguous loss, is the loss of relationship mutuality. So in a partnership, whether it's married, unmarried, if you're in a partnership with somebody, from the caregiver's perspective, you often experience the loss of a partnership. After brain injury, the balance has shifted. Things often feel very one-sided, and it makes it incredibly difficult to set boundaries. You might have been a married couple who you both had jobs. You both shared the responsibility of paying bills and child rearing. And now that partner, the one with the brain injury, is not able to contribute in that way anymore. So everything sort of naturally defaults to you. It won't get done if I don't do it. If I don't do it, who will? And when you're in that position, it makes it really, really hard to set boundaries. Again, along with ambiguous loss, a caregiver is left feeling, and when we say caregiver at the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa, we don't necessarily mean somebody who is literally caregiving, as in 24 hours a day, I'm helping bathe them, I'm feeding them, it doesn't have to look like that. Quite simply, it's loving and caring for, however that looks, somebody with a brain injury. And when you're navigating ambiguous loss after a brain injury, caregivers experience a range of mixed, conflicting emotions about this new person in their life. So remember, you've had this loss. That person is still physically in front of you, but they're different now. So this is a new version of this person. And you're reeling from that, as well as your ability and desire to love and care for this person. So with that comes feelings of guilt and confusion, gratitude, resentment, betrayal, anger, hope, hopelessness. These feelings, some more than others, make it very difficult to set boundaries. Guilt, that first one there, is probably the worst offender as far as making that really hard on people. Part of the grief process, the stages of grief, speaking of guilt, bargaining is one of those stages. Bargaining is often called guilt's companion. In this stage, you ask yourself, what if and if only? You're willing to do anything to get life back to the way it was before the injury, to rewind time, to do things differently, to prevent the accident, to negotiate with God or a higher power. We make endless promises to be better, to do better, and we kind of get stuck in the past and we try to negotiate our way out of the hurt. In my family, my grandpa had a rare form of ALS called PLS, a neurological condition, and he also suffered a number of strokes. And after his first one, he was moved into a skilled nursing facility. And because I was the closest relative, about 5 minutes away from my house, initially I put heaps of just crushing guilt on myself with respect to hours long, no boundaries, extended visits, because I felt like I needed to. That was something I needed to do. Those visits gave me purpose. I was able to channel my grief. It helped my other family members. But because they were boundaryless, it quickly became really unhealthy. And it resulted in the first and only panic attacks I'd ever had, one of which that put me in the hospital. So having no boundaries can often look like this, where we quite literally run ourselves into the ground. And I share my story and some of those personal details about caregiving and grief, because I always want to know my listeners to know that I really get some of this on a very personal level, as well as a professional one. Remember, if someone gets angry at you for setting and maintaining a boundary, and when I heard this the first time, it really hit me. If someone gets angry at you for setting and maintaining a boundary, it almost always means that they benefited from you not having one, and that a boundary was and is necessary. Oftentimes that anger that's directed at us when we set a boundary, we interpret it as, oh, I asked for too much. I was out of line, or I was being traumatic, or I'm being selfish. Not the case. If you say no and someone gets upset, it does not mean that you should have said yes. Pay attention when people react with anger and hostility to your boundaries, because that means you have found the edge where their respect for you ends. Pretty profound quotes there. We're going to take some time just to go through some different kinds of boundaries, because I think they're important to remember. I think some of them are common sense to us, and others we may not have stopped to think like, oh, okay, this is an area that's where boundary work needs to be done. So there's physical boundaries. Those might look like personal space and proximity, touch, PDA, unwanted comments regarding appearance or sexuality, and then also to just knowing what your body does and doesn't need. So some examples that I included throughout are ones that I've actually used in my own life. So one could be no hugs for me today, thank you. And I have an 8-year-old and an almost 6-year-old. So I try to model and really teach the setting of boundaries. And one of them is, okay, say goodbye to grandma and grandpa. You do not have to give or get hugs and kisses if you don't want to. So really teaching body autonomy. I'm feeling overstimulated at the moment. I need to step away for a few minutes until I feel more relaxed. When I come to visit, I will be staying in a hotel. I liked this one just because the holidays are coming up, and that's a triggering time for people, family, and needing and wanting to set boundaries, really hold them with other people. No, thank you. I won't be drinking tonight. I'll just have a water. Please don't comment on my body. You don't have to taste it if you don't want to. This is something that we do with our kids. You know, if there's a new dish being served, of course, we want them to try new things, but it's their body. As adults, we don't force each other to try things. I'm not going to make them. Thank you. That looks delicious, but I'm not hungry at the moment. And you have to be willing to, unfortunately, disappoint somebody. You can hear some of these, they can even be hard to hear, like, oof, the person receiving that boundary is not going to like it. And you know what? That's okay. Please don't move my wheelchair without asking me first. In the field of working in brain injury, for somebody in a wheelchair, that is an extension of their body. And sometimes wheelchairs get touched and moved without permission. So I thought, okay, this is a good one to put in there. Another kind of boundary is emotional, social, or relationship specific. This can look like inappropriate topics, emotional dumping, dismissing emotions, not taking responsibility for someone else's choices and actions, and behavior that you are or are not willing to put up with. I will end this phone call if you raise your voice like that at me again. I'm not comfortable discussing this topic with you. It's off limits. If that happens again, I will leave. Because you made that comment on social media, I will be blocking you on Facebook. I respect your opinion, but this is my life and these are my decisions. I need you to stop talking about that, as it's very triggering for me. I'm going to have to step away. I'm not comfortable gossiping about other people. You seem to be committed. I really like this one. You seem to be committed to misunderstanding me, and I don't care to continue to explain myself to you about this. I love you and I want to support you in this, but this sounds like something you will have to or need to talk to your therapist about. This is that emotional dumping one. And I won't be discussing that. Oh, that meant to say topic. I won't be discussing that topic during my visit. So a lot of these, and I thought, oh, the holidays are right around the corner. This is a really good topic to talk about. Sexual boundaries. So this might look like your comfort with sexual experiences and also the sharing of intimate details. My sex life is mine and it is personal. I won't share those details with you, or that information is private. Material. So these may look like money and resources you give or loan and how they can be used or treated. And again, so many of these, as I was creating it, I was like, goodness, there's just a lot of holiday themes kind of woven in here. I'm here to talk this through with you, to brainstorm ideas, but I am not available to loan you money. I will not be making a donation at this time. I've gotten asked that a lot. You know, this time of year, you get asked that a lot at the registers. I would love to attend, but I won't be able to participate in the gift exchange. Time and energy. This might look like what you're willing to spend your time on. Lateness, when to contact, favors, and free labor. And some of these, they spill out into other categories. So time and energy, for example, for myself, is time and energy that I have just in my day-to-day. And then I have time and energy with respect to my work and my clients. So there's going to be other like subtopics, if you will, under some of these. I do not respond to work emails over the weekend. I need time to think about that. I'll get back to you about this. I can come, but I will only be staying for 1 hour and then I'll have to leave. I have a lot going on this time of year, so I won't be able to make and bring anything to the meal this time. If you text me in the evening, I will text you back the next business day at a time that works best for me. I apologize. I have a bad migraine. I'm going to go lay down until I feel better. I have chronic migraines, so I often have to communicate boundaries that are tough for people because it means me leaving early or rescheduling plans. But it's something that I have to do. And again, it's trusting your body and knowing what you need and what you don't need. It is not okay with me that you made plans for us without including me. My plate is full. I won't be able to take that on. Talking about this is really important. I like this one too. I've actually used it with my husband, and when I'm having a tough conversation with somebody and I really want to feel heard, but maybe they're not as present as I want them to be, I like this one. Talking about this topic is really important to me. I want to make sure that you are really hearing me, and you seem distracted, and that's okay. So I'd like to talk about this later instead. Remember, your time and energy are precious. Protect them. And as a caregiver, I know this is easier said than done, and you get so much less time and energy than those who are not caregiving. So that really boils down to why we're talking about this today, is to find ways that you can start setting some boundaries. We can set boundaries with ourselves as well as other people. And they should be set with ourselves and other people. And both are important and both are necessary. Setting boundaries with ourselves. So when we first practice boundary setting with ourselves, it becomes more natural and easier to create and hold them with other people. Love yourself first so you know what you deserve. Again, it takes practice, and it could be, oh boy, it could be related to trying to get healthy and you're on a diet and you're setting boundaries about the kinds of things that you can enjoy. It could be setting a boundary around, hey, I really setting a boundary that when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to make myself a cup of coffee and I'm going to do 15 minutes out of my devotional. Or I'm going to make time for myself every evening after I, make a meal for my family. I'm going to take a 10-minute walk, whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be huge, but just setting boundaries with yourself first. Setting boundaries with others. And I like this sort of self-directed activity, just sort of exploring it further, how boundary setting feels to you and where there's specific struggles maybe. So asking yourself, whether you just, ask yourself in your head or you're writing them down, I struggle with setting boundaries with this person. I struggle with setting then the type of boundaries. So with this person, I struggle with setting boundaries. Maybe it's a boss and you struggle with setting time and energy boundaries with her, or a client. I have some clients that I work with that I really have to prepare for interactions with them because my time and energy boundaries are bumped up against. I struggle with setting boundaries with him or her because there's no right or wrong answer. When he or she doesn't respect my boundaries, I feel hurt. I'm angry. I feel bitterness. I'm resentful. And oftentimes those feelings, hurt, anger, bitterness, resentment, they're usually signs that boundaries are necessary. So this process can be really revealing and really helpful. And I feel this way because I feel like my time isn't valued. Because I feel like, oh gosh, there's just so many different things. I feel used, if somebody's always asking you for money. I feel this way because I feel I'm important to this person only because I have something monetary to offer. So really exploring how you feel and why you feel it. And then specific actions I can do and key phrases I can use to set boundaries with him or her include. And then we're going to dive into some specifics that hopefully help you set boundaries. And I use these all the time. I had to use them yesterday during a particularly challenging conversation that was work-related. So hopefully, again, you walk away with some tangible things that you'll be able to use in both your personal and professional life. How do we do this? How do we set boundaries with other people? Stop apologizing. And none of these things are said dismissively, like they're easy to do, because this is all difficult. So stop apologizing. Ask without apology. Replace I'm sorry with thank you. I like this perspective change here. For example, I'm sorry that I didn't have time to make anything versus thank you for inviting me to this special event. So you can say the same thing in a different way. So replacing negativity and blame or shame with positivity and gratitude is very powerful, and it will help with boundary setting. It's just a perspective change, just a different way of looking at it. I've tried to adopt this as well because I tend to be, low self-esteem, people pleaser. So tend to be overly apologetic, I think. So I've tried to do this myself. Remember that you know you and your needs best. Again, if you've been through trauma, whether it's childhood, you've been abused in any way, you might have mental illness, depression, anxiety that makes you sort of question this. You are living in the aftermath of brain injury. Again, going through trauma can really make you question who you are and what you need. But you know your needs best. Know your values. Know what's important to you. Listen to yourself. Trust yourself. Again, hard to do, but you know you best. You know what you need. Be proactive and plan ahead. This is a big one, I think, with setting boundaries. So when you can, when it's realistic, know your boundaries before entering a situation, making it less likely you'll find yourself stuck and do or say something you don't want to. For example, I mentioned that I have chronic migraines. So if there's a big family event coming up and I'm worried about upsetting people, what's going to be my out? How do I leave the room? How do I leave the situation? How do I minimize drama? That kind of thing. If you're able to know what your boundaries are before entering a situation, it will help, because then you can practice and rehearse and sort of think through plan A and B and C, and how might this all play out. It's not always that neat and tidy as far as knowing what your boundaries are before you walk into a situation, but it can help. Remember that, like I said earlier, creating and maintaining a boundary is not easy or conflict free. And just because somebody doesn't like a boundary that you set, they're offended, they get angry, they make you feel badly about it, does not mean that you should not have set the boundary. And oftentimes it means that it was absolutely necessary. It's not conflict free at all. So it feels icky to set boundaries, quite honestly, a lot of the time. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be set. And then think through the possible implications. When you set a boundary, I think it's important to think about, and you can't always predict it with certainty, but think about, okay, how might this person respond? Are they going to decide, if I have to walk away from this family event and go lay down for 2 hours because I have a migraine, am I going to be received back with understanding, or, how's that going to look? So sometimes you have to think through, like, okay, I'm as prepared as I can be in thinking about how this could play out, and then have realistic expectations that, again, just knowing that boundary setting isn't easy. It's not conflict free. I wish it were, but just knowing that some of that stuff might happen, and that does not mean that the boundary wasn't okay for you to set. Utilize a script to help you confidently remember what you want and need to say. Excuse me. Doing so can help you remain anchored during tough conversations. I do this all of the time, honestly, whether it's with a family member. I do it a lot with clients that I work with, or other professionals. So if I have to have a tough advocacy conversation on behalf of a client, for example, or I have to work with a client who, for whatever reason, is just kind of slamming up against the boundaries that I've set, I often, knowing a conversation is coming up, I will sort of rehearse it. I know that we're going to be talking about this topic, and this is likely going to be said or asked of me. And then I actually write down phrases that I can take into those situations that keep me anchored. Because when you're stressed out, when your boundaries are pushed, when you feel hurt or disappointed or offended, all of those great skills that we have, conflict resolution skills and our interpersonal skills, a lot of those fall away. And I don't want to say or do something that I'm going to regret with the people that I love or the people that I serve. So I think this is a really important takeaway, honestly. Even if you have regular conversations with somebody and you need to have a little Post-it in your wallet or on a mirror, something that you can see and rehearse and use as a tangible tool can be helpful. Rehearse what you plan on saying and practice saying it out loud. I've done this before. Even reading the examples earlier on the slides that we went through of the different types of boundaries, as I read them, I found myself, I was smiling, and I stood up much straighter in my chair. It almost made me feel empowered saying those, not almost, it did. Even reading those examples made me feel strong. So there is something to be said about practicing saying this stuff out loud. And then if you need to role play, I've done that with my husband before, whether it's us talking about, gosh, I need to write this email to my boss and it's tough stuff, or a client, or, a family member, role playing it. And then using the communication medium that you're most comfortable and confident using, whether that's in person, text, phone call, email. I tend to, if it's phone call, I use a lot of the anchor statements right in front of me so I can refer to those. I do the same thing if it's written. I tend to prefer written boundaries only because you can tangibly go back to them, and they seem more concrete sometimes with certain people. So it's just going to depend on what's the easiest, what's comfortable, what do you feel confident doing. And then practicing what's called baby no's. as in saying small no's, so that the bigger boundaries feel a little bit easier to set. So start out, if setting boundaries feels gross and is hard and makes you feel guilty, start out by setting little ones. And practice setting those, even if they don't feel small, practice setting those baby no's so that the big ones are easier for you down the road. Use I statements. You may have heard of this before. So I statements take responsibility for one's own feelings while tactfully describing a problem. It puts the listener on the offense versus making them feel blamed and thus becoming defensive. And then they're not going to hear anything you're trying to say. So the steps kind of look like this. So I feel is followed by an emotion word. So I feel angry. I feel hurt. I feel worried. I feel offended. Use a soft and even tone. This can be hard to do when emotions are involved. And then gently describe how the other person's actions affect you. I feel disrespected and deeply hurt when you raise your voice at me like that. I will end this phone call if it happens again. Versus, you're always yelling at me. It's not okay. You know what I mean? So it's saying the same thing in a different way, and one that's going to hopefully probably be received much more effectively if you start out with the I statement. It's one of these seemingly small things that can make a big difference in communicating with other people. Be respectful. Again, this is really hard because we're talking about things that are important to us, the things that we want to set boundaries for. We're talking about our feelings. As much as you can, avoid raising your voice or yelling, calling names, swearing, placing blame. The I statements can naturally help with avoiding placing blame. Using a soft and even tone, as cliche as it might sound, the golden rule, have this conversation in a way that you would want someone else to have it with you. And then hopefully your message will be that much better received if you do these things. Be confident. And this can be really hard to do, especially if you just don't have a lot of confidence and you've been through trauma or you've been abused in some way. It's hard to stand up for yourself and set boundaries and feel like you have a voice, to feel like that you have a right to have a voice. Remember that setting boundaries is a way of honoring yourself. Remember that you have the right to balance your own needs with the needs of the person you care for. Remember that you deserve and are allowed to make a big deal out of things that feel big to you. Like I said, if it's important to you, then it's important. It doesn't have to be to anybody else. Say what you mean and mean what you say, and take up space. I like that. It just means take up space. Be important, feel important. The things that matter to you are. Take up space. You don't have to make yourself small for other people. You don't have to give away chunks of yourself to make other people whole. There's another quote I've heard where you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You matter. Take up space. When you're not used to feeling confident, confidence can feel like arrogance. It can feel like being selfish. When you're used to being passive, when someone's assertive, it can feel like aggression. So it really kind of depends on what you've been through and how you're going to interpret receiving a boundary, setting a boundary. When you're not used to getting your needs met, prioritizing yourself, again, especially with caregivers, it's going to feel selfish. Your comfort zone is not a benchmark. So that is just quite simply reminding us that just because it feels selfish, it feels icky, it feels like I'm taking up too much space, that doesn't mean that that's the reality. It doesn't mean that those things are correct. They're just your feelings. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's reality. Be as clear as possible. So be specific when you're setting boundaries. Refer to examples if you need to. Speak in black and white terms, avoiding ambiguity, which can inadvertently then leave things up to interpretation. So say what you mean and mean what you say. Be as clear as you can. Be as clear as you can about what you will and will not accept. Not just that, but also the natural consequences if the boundary is not respected. So I like to use an if-then contingency. So if you're going to, if you raise your voice at me like that again, then I'll have to terminate this call. So not only making clear what your boundary and limits are, but here's what's going to happen if this boundary is pushed or not respected. Be open to compromise. So know that boundaries can be flexible. They don't have to be set in stone. They can be fluid, or they can be set in stone. It depends. Know your limits. Again, where you are and where you are not willing to bend. Maybe you go into a situation thinking that, okay, this is my boundary and I'm unmoving. But maybe then you discover, okay, I actually am willing to be a bit flexible and shuffle this around a little. When appropriate, listen and consider the needs of the other person. You don't have to compromise, but just know that some give and take is part of any healthy relationship. When you're on the side of a caregiver, you feel naturally that you're only on the give side. So it can be really hard to feel like, well, I don't want to compromise. I have compromised my whole life. I have never come first. And you don't have to compromise. But again, just know that some amount of give and take is usually part of any healthy relationship. And so this is going to look different, obviously, depending on the person you're setting boundaries with. Oh, why does that always happen? I feel like I can never get through one webinar without my PowerPoint deciding just to totally shut down. Hang with me. Thank you for being patient and giving me some grace. This happens almost every time. It's the world we live in with technology. I think, boom, I think we are here. And current slide. Oh, there we go. Thank you, and my apologies. So let's move on to the last few slides. So I wanted to talk about two cool things that I have come across in kind of researching boundaries, and one of them is called a Caregiver Bill of Rights. So what is it? It provides you with a concrete, tangible reminder of your rights. It can be used as an affirmation for you to regularly refer to. You could post it on a mirror. You could keep it in your purse or in your pocket. You could pull it out when you need it or when you want to. Makes your rights feel more real and believable. Again, where you can stand in front of a mirror, or you can just sit and read them out loud and hear yourself saying these things, saying them sort of into believing them. And so I have a few slides about what a Caregiver Bill of Rights can look like. There's no right or wrong way to do this. I saw this particular set and I modified it just a little on caringvillage.com. It's just a random website that I kind of run across. So sitting down and taking time, and it would be really hard, obviously, if you've not set a lot of boundaries or you don't think you have rights to do this, but it's a very powerful process. So it might sound like this. So to take care of myself, as a caregiver, I have the right to take care of myself. This is not an act of selfishness. It will give me the capability of taking better care of my loved one. As a caregiver, I have the right to seek help from others, even though my loved ones may object. I can recognize the limits of my own endurance and strength. Again, that's trusting your body and what it does and doesn't need, and what it can and can't handle. I'm only human. I can only do so much. As a caregiver, I have the right to maintain facets of my own life that do not include the person I care for, because so much of your identity is wrapped up in that person if you're caregiving, just as I would if he or she were healthy. I know that I do everything that I reasonably can for this person, and I have the right to do some things just for myself. As a caregiver, I have the right to get and feel angry, to feel hurt, to feel disappointed, to feel unbelievably sad, and feel and express other difficult feelings as they arise. As a caregiver, I have the right to reject any attempts made by my loved one, either conscious or unconsciously, to manipulate me through guilt, anger, depression, etc. As a caregiver, I have the right to receive consideration, affection, forgiveness, and acceptance for what I do from my loved ones for as long as I offer these qualities in return. As a caregiver, I have the right to take pride in what I am accomplishing and to applaud the courage it has sometimes taken to meet the needs of my loved ones. If you are living in the after of brain injury, as a caregiver, you have and are living through deep trauma and grief, and it can be hard to find the good and see the positive and the progress, but as much as you can to reflect on that is really important. As a caregiver, I have the right to protect my individuality and my right to make a life for myself that will sustain me in the time when my loved one no longer needs my full-time help, if that's the situation. So those are some examples of what that powerful sort of Bill of Rights can look and sound like. And then there's a thing called a not to-do list. And I hadn't heard of this before, kind of diving into boundary research, but I really like it. I have all sorts of to-do lists across many categories of my life, and it's overwhelming. The idea of creating a not to-do list sounds really great. So some examples of what you might put on it. Stuff that distracts me and wastes my time. Stuff that drains my energy. Stuff that doesn't actually need to be done. A lot of times, you know, if we're living in grief or after trauma, everything seems like, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, everything's a 10. Everything's an emergency. Everything has to be done right now today. But actually creating a list of, you know, there might be actually some things that don't need to be done or don't need to be done right now. Stuff that stresses me out and gives me anxiety. I'm going to take that off my plate. Stuff I feel obligated to do. I'm not going to do it. Yep, I can come next week to the dinner, but I'm not going to be able to, again, you know, I really want to come to the party, but I'm not going to be able to, I don't have time or the resources to participate in the gift exchange. And you don't owe people a big explanation. So again, identifying the things that you don't have to do. Stuff I can't control, or isn't my responsibility. I cannot control as much as I'd like the people around me. They have autonomy and free will. They're going to make their decisions, and those are their consequences. That can be really hard in the caregiver relationship. There's often codependency that just naturally is a part of that, where you feel like how they behave, the choices that they make, and they do often affect you directly. And it feels very much like it's your responsibility. Stuff that makes me feel bad about myself. So these are just some prompts to maybe reflect on, whether you put pen to paper and you journal it or you talk about it with somebody. It can be revealing and very helpful, I think, in just learning more about yourself, and also work that can be done in making boundary setting easier. So it's just a nice reminder. It's a good self-care tool. I think we might be on our last slide. We are. We made pretty good time. So I'm going to put, for those of you that maybe were a couple minutes late and missed this, there's a chat box in Zoom if you're not super familiar with it. I just dropped a link in there to a brief evaluation. We do this after all of our webinars. I will admit, before I started speaking regularly and doing training, I was a person that was like, ugh, another one of those things. And I sometimes admittedly didn't do it. We really do look at the data and use that data to make determinations about future trainings that we do, and what do we need to do better? What do we need to keep doing? So if you are able to see that chat box, if you're able to click on that link and just take a few minutes to fill it out, it's just, I think maybe 7 questions. And the majority of them, you can just hit like agree, disagree, that kind of thing. So, thank you again to those of you that participated today and joined us. I have a passion for caregiving, and this topic really was sort of on my heart, just because I know that it's hard for everybody, but especially hard for caregivers. And again, going into the holidays, my goodness, this can be a really challenging time for all of us in holding our boundaries. And also maybe too, this has helped you not only understand how to set boundaries, but also maybe respecting other people's as well. Like, oh gosh, here's an area where I've been a little, I don't know, challenging with their boundary. So I hope that it's been validating, eye-opening, and that you've walked away with some tangible tools. Thank you again for participating. And if you've missed any part of this or you liked it and you want to share it, we will have this uploaded to our YouTube channel. And by our, I mean the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa. We should have this uploaded to our YouTube channel sometime next week so that it can be shared with others. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And again, thank you for joining us today, and hope your holidays are wonderful. Thank you, everybody.